Hey everyone, it's the Reverend Jendi Burwell here. I'm recording this on Saturday night because I have a long day tomorrow for Sunday. So here is my thoughts for the Sunday sermon reflection slot, so that if you've missed church this morning, Sunday morning, that you are still able to ponder on the scriptures. The gospel reading today is Matthew 14:22 to 33, where Jesus walks on the water. Okay, so lots of things in the scriptures as usual. Just before today's reading, we had Jesus and the disciples feeding the 5,000 plus on the beach. We heard about that last week, and my thoughts are also on YouTube and our Facebook page about that. Remember, these stories were written down years after the events and years after there had been Jewish oral tradition where the stories were told and retold and crafted and reworded and reworked for particular purposes. Matthew's written based on the earlier Gospel of Mark. Mark is written maybe 40 to 60 years after Jesus died, and Matthew perhaps 15 years later. Mark was written to a Gentile audience, a non-Jewish audience, and Matthew was written to a Jewish Christian audience. And Matthew is different, has been changed from Mark in places, and that happens again with today's reading. It is written to a different audience to make a different point. Maybe some later material is taken into account as well, but it definitely is to serve a different point than Mark, and so has been reworked. And the Gospels today are still alive and can speak into our situations now, even though another, roughly 2,000 years or 1,900 years has gone by. In today's Gospel, and in all of them, there's a number of text, literary and visual images that are used to tell us specific things, and we need to read them in context with the ways that things were written at the time, a long time ago. So, immediately after the 5,000 had been fed and all the leftovers had been collected up, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. Now, they talk about dismissing the crowds twice, which is interesting because it's not mentioned in Mark twice. Matthew is working hard to make sure people know about Jesus' authority. And then Jesus goes up to pray on the mountaintop alone, and again in Matthew that point is made twice, that he's alone up the mountain. And again, it is on purpose to make Jesus appear very lordly, very spiritual leader with the mystique of being alone up the mountain. These might seem to be subtle differences, but they actually speak volumes. And then, of course, there's the big visual symbolism of the boat itself, which is an allegory or a symbol of the church. Now, it might seem odd to say that the boat in the story, when the boat's been buffeted by winds, and the boat is the church. I mean, after all, is this not just a story about a time that some people got into a boat and travelled to the other side of the water? Well, maybe it is a story about that, but it is so much more than that. At the time, in art and in writings, the boat is a symbol of the church. There are so many writings, so many commentaries that make that historical reference. To this day, many church sanctuaries are built in the shape of an upside-down boat, even. The logo for the World Council of Churches is a boat. That point is clearly made in the writings. And specifically, a fishing boat is seen to represent the kingdom of Christ and his followers. So very much the church. So, does seeing the boat as a picture for the small and fragile church result in any extra depth of meaning for us? The boat of the church faces difficulty from evil, which is represented by the tormented sea in the middle of the night. The church was sailing against the wind. If Matthew been written about 80-85 AD, which is the general consensus, then that is probably how Matthew saw the situation facing the church at the time, particularly the small Jewish Christian group that he is writing to. The land was trying to recover from the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. In AD 80-85, the church was still very small and very fragile. Jewish Christian church, facing threats both internal and external. Feeling adrift in the waters of chaos would make sense for a small and emerging movement in that situation. Very fragile, as it turns out. After all, are there many Jewish Christians around now? However, the church has probably grown to much more than Matthew's wildest dreams. The image of the restless sea buffeted by winds and rain was a rich one in ancient Israel. The book of Genesis tells of chaos in the beginning of creation. The creation was without form and void. Genesis describes the act of creation as God bringing order out of watery chaos. Ancient Israel has a fear of these waters of chaos. They feared that this chaos might again engulf the world and undo the order that God had imposed upon creation. It was important then to help God keep the waters of chaos in check, which you could do by living according to the Torah, according to the Jewish law. So during the fourth watch, which is about 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., the deepest, darkest part of the night, Jesus came walking on the sea towards the scared and fragile church. So just imagine for a moment, in our deepest, darkest time for us and for the church, that Jesus will walk towards us to be with us again, perhaps in unexpected ways, at unexpected times, and just completely unexpected in every way. Will we be ready for that, or will we be scared and confused? Will we reject Jesus' appearance? The disciples are agitated or troubled, disturbed, and they believe they're seeing a ghost. They screamed because of fear. Interestingly, that's fear of Jesus, not fear of the waves, not fear of the situation, but fear of Jesus appearing in that way and at that time. They do not recognize him. They think it is something else. I guess fundamentally they don't expect Jesus to show himself at that time and in the way of walking across the waves. It's at this point when fear in the face of difficulty threatens to overtake the church that Jesus lets them know that it is him. Take heart, or perhaps have courage, he says. So why should they take heart? Well, because Jesus says, I am, which is the Greek version of the Hebrew Yahweh, which is the divine name of God as revealed to Moses. Remember Midrash? Retelling of Jewish stories. And Matthew sees Jesus as the second Moses, the greater Moses. And by the way, Matthew is the most Jewish of the Gospels, and therefore reading Matthew is enhanced by seeing the links back to the Hebrew scriptures, back to the Old Testament, as they are everywhere. Those links are everywhere in Matthew. The Lord God took control of the waters of chaos. By walking on the water, Jesus likewise demonstrates his power over the forces of nature. The power of Jesus is the same as God's power. Therefore, church, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, church, when Jesus is with you, perhaps unexpectedly. That might be something worth pondering further. Because since Pentecost, we might think Jesus is always with us anyhow. He ascended, then descended again at Pentecost. So Spirit is here, Jesus is here, Creator is here, God is here, so cool. We don't need to be concerned about that, do we? However, we don't really want to take that for granted. We still do the work and we live in ways that allows for the Spirit to work in us and through us. We need to see and recognise God along the way, particularly when it's unexpected and surprising. Now, Peter walks on the water too, and this is only in Matthew's version, it's not in Mark's. So what is Matthew trying to say with this addition? Now, the ending's quite different too, and we'll turn to that soon. So, Peter walking is interesting. Peter addresses Jesus as Lord. Score 1 for Peter. He gets the title right. Peter wants to be able to do what Jesus does, and he asks to be commanded to do it. Jesus simply says, "Come." Peter climbs down out of the boat, and the text straightforwardly says that Peter did indeed walk on the water. However, we miss a subtle point in the English. Peter walks on water, while Jesus walks on the sea when you look at the Greek words used. Matthew is being careful to point out that Peter at least is doing slightly less than what Jesus himself is capable of doing. And then in an insightful phrase, Peter sees the mighty wind. He didn't feel it, he saw it. Seeing in this way means he understands the situation. It's a deeper kind of seeing. The church is buffeted by the mighty winds of internal and external opposition. Seeing, really seeing, is an interesting word because once we see something in this way, we can't unsee it, and that can be scary. When we see the truth of a situation, really see it, we start to understand it. It might scare us, and then we kind of have to do something about it. Peter succumbs to the fear and he starts to sink and he cries out to Jesus. How true is that? Immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand, which is reminiscent of Yahweh in Psalm 18. He reached down from on high, he took me, he drew me out of the mighty waters. And Psalm 144, stretch out your hand from on high, set me free and rescue me from the mighty waters. Jesus takes hold of Peter and while still out on the sea, calls Peter a person of little faith, one who becomes fearful in the face of a crisis. In Matthew's Gospel, the disciples are referred to as being people of little faith 5 times, and there will be more on this next week. And remember, I said the ending is different too. So again, we have to think, what is Matthew trying to say? Why has he made the change? So in Mark, we've got, and he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astonished, for they did not understand about the loaves. Remember the feeding of the 5,000. But their hearts were hardened. And yet in Matthew we hear, and when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Quite different in the space of 15 years. Their hearts were hardened becomes, truly you are the Son of God. Quite different. Matthew works really, really hard to state who Jesus is. And here we have a disciple finally getting it. Mark completely concentrates on the absolute lack of faith of the disciples. Matthew's working hard to get his text to say the lordship of Christ, how important Christ is, and yet the disciples mostly don't get it. There's a couple of glimpses where they do, but mostly they still don't. Next week, that story continues. Now, from Mark's Gospel, as Gentiles, we might take comfort knowing that the disciples got it wrong. After all, there's hope for us yet. However, now we are also believers, we are also the church, we are the insiders now to the stories that Matthew was being written to. And maybe we too need the reminder that Matthew gives us about who Jesus is, and a little bit of the kick that we still maybe don't get it. I think there's some interesting questions to kind of wonder about, and maybe it's, where do we encounter Jesus in unexpected ways and unexpected places? And will we step out in faith even when we see the dangers? When we're scared and when we're uncertain, what will we do? As the boat that represents the church is buffeted and is in danger, will we keep our eyes on Jesus and see, really see, what is around us? Will we accept Jesus when he appears to us in those unexpected ways and in those unexpected places? I think the story was really interesting 1900 odd years ago. And let's be honest, it's really interesting now as the church still is potentially buffeted and perhaps in danger. And where I think we absolutely encounter Jesus in unexpected ways and in unexpected places. Will we rise to the challenge? I guess that's the question. There's a bunch of websites and commentaries and books and podcasts that need a lot of credit for today's work. So if you have any questions about those, I will try and share them in the description. Otherwise, please send us a comment or a message. I would love to discuss these scriptures further with you as we ponder stuff and as the church hopefully reaches out and accepts Jesus in unexpected ways. God bless you. I hope you have a wonderful Sunday wherever you are, and I look forward to catching up with you again in the near future. Amen.